heard the term grain direction and wondered what it means? I'm Macrina of Anesi Bindings, and in this series of videos I plan to offer some bookbinding tips and tricks that I hope will be helpful to non-bookbinders. I've always thought of grain direction as the sort of thing that is of concern to bookbinders, something that we need to take into consideration in our work. But a recent Facebook conversation made me aware that it may also be important to a broader audience, and more particularly to people who are looking to have a Bible rebound and are perhaps trying to determine whether a specific Bible is a good candidate for a rebind. Many people have heard of the difference between a stitched text block and a glued or perfect bound text block. And they know that if they're going to have a Bible rebound, it is always better to have a stitched text block. But they may not be aware that grain direction is also a factor to take into consideration when deciding on a rebind. So, what is grain direction and why should we be concerned with it? Grain direction refers to the paper's inner structure, which is invisible to the naked eye. When paper is made, the direction in which it is moving causes most of the fibers to align in the same direction. If you take a sheet of ordinary printer paper and gently bend it, you will probably discover that it bends easier in the length than in the width. This is because the grain direction is usually in the long grain. When binding books, it is best that the signatures, the folded booklets that will be stitched together, are folded with the grain direction and not against it. It is also best that the end pages and the cover boards, or even the covering material, all run in the same direction. If the grain direction is wrong, this means that the various parts of the book will not be in perfect alignment and will actually be pulling away from one another. This places pressure on the spine particularly, and also makes the pages more difficult to turn, making them more vulnerable to tears. Wrong grain direction also makes a book particularly sensitive to moisture and may result in the page edges becoming wavy. Unfortunately, cost-cutting measures have led to many publishers ignoring grain direction, and it is not always possible to insist on the correct grain direction when choosing to have a Bible rebound, especially for those of us who gravitate towards Catholic and/or Orthodox Bibles that are only available in limited editions. However, if you're able to do so, it is good to be aware of grain direction when considering whether a Bible is a good candidate for a rebind. So, how can you tell whether a book's grain direction is correct? Basically, in the case of a book that is already bound, by feeling how easily it bends in different directions. However, this is much easier to do with a loose sheet of paper, so it would be good to practice with that first. This is a sheet of printer paper that I have cut square so that the grain direction is not obvious to me. If I try bending it in both directions, I will soon discover that it bends much easier in one direction, this one, than the other. This is the paper's grain direction in which it should be folded and stitched. If you can't determine the grain direction by bending the paper, you could also tear it in both directions. you will find that it tears straight more easily with the grain than against the grain. Alternatively, you can dampen the edges. The edge that buckles more when it is dampened is the edge that is against the grain. This edge is buckling more, which means that the grain direction, yes, the grain direction is like that. Becomes clearer after a minute or two. However, you probably won't want to tear or dampen the pages of a Bible, so it is best to get a feel for the way a paper bends or turns. Here are two examples of Bibles with different grain direction. My Ignatius Press RSV 2CE has paper with the correct grain direction, and when I turn or bend it, there is no resistance. By contrast, the ESV CE, the Indian edition, while otherwise a nice enough Bible, has paper with an incorrect grain, and I can feel more resistance when I bend it. Grain direction is not the most important factor in choosing a Bible to rebind. It's certainly less important than whether a text block is stitched or not. And we sometimes have to work with what we have. But if you are able to pay attention to it, then it is certainly best to do so. If you've found this video helpful, then please help me by liking it. And if you would like to be alerted to new videos on this channel, especially my tips and tricks for non-bookbinders, then please subscribe to receive notifications. The next video that I'm planning will be on options for mending paper tears.